Hey everybody, and welcome to this first video from CULTIVATION on how to survive medicinal cannabis in New Zealand. This is primarily an introduction, more specifically aimed at legacy growers who are wanting to make their way in the legal framework. Now before we get started with this though, I wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit with a quote that I heard recently, and it says that cannabis cultivation is pure science, but it's also art. So who am I? My name is Josiah. I've set up multiple licensed facilities here in New Zealand, and you can find me at chilldivision.co.nz and follow along with our journey on Instagram. We post a lot of our photos and updates and things there to the Instagram profile. So what can you expect from this presentation? Slides? Lots and lots of slides. We'll go over some of the history. We'll cover the NZ MQS standards. We're going to cover licenses, what you do and don't want. We're going to cover the process for applying, general growing tips and recommendations, further things for you to consider and questions to reflect on, and then a closing Q&A time. Or more specifically, because this was originally going to be provided as an in-person presentation, you can just ask questions in the comments section down below. There is going to be a lot of nuance to some of the things that we say, so keep that in mind. Some of this has been oversimplified. Some things aren't black and white to start with, but just bear in mind that there is nuance to a lot of this. So, again, feel free to ask questions. Given that this is now online and going to be on our YouTube channel, feel free to leave comments down in the comment section. You can always send us an email. You can visit us through the website, get to our Instagram, and you can leave comments on Instagram as well if that's easier for you. So, a brief history. Now, we're not going to go through every single line in all of these slides. The slides are there so that you can refer back to them later on. So as we go along, you'll see we'll skip over a lot of kind of items. But in terms of the general history, it originally started back in 2017 and was going to be specifically for terminally ill and chronic pain only. That's now evolved, so we can see down April 1st, 2020, we have our current medicinal cannabis scheme regulations coming into effect. Now, quote taken from the Medicinal Cannabis Agency website, at the bottom it says there, the purpose of the medicinal cannabis scheme is to improve access to quality medicinal cannabis products for patients. The unfortunate reality is that quality is often replaced with safety, but that's open for interpretation. So medicinal cannabis is here to stay. Like it or not, Rick failed in the referendum. Now, in the unlikely event that that changes, medicinal use is still not actually going to go away. So everybody's now talking about there being another opportunity potentially in 5 to 10 years. Who knows? But as it stands, medicinal is here to stay. So we might as well make the best of it. So a full word on the Medicinal Cannabis Agency. They are your friend. It's worth being nice to them. At least as of March 2023, they are horribly short-staffed, underfunded, busy balancing patients, prescribers, the industry, and the legislation. Now, the entire Medicinal Cannabis Agency is a bit of a loss leader for the government. They basically don't get a cent aside from GST. There's no gatekeeping from the government going on, and MCA themselves don't actually get enough back in terms of application and license fees to recover the costs for their staff, the building, that kind of jazz, at least according to what we heard recently from MedSafe. You will still hear a bunch of conspiracy theories going, the government just wants to keep people out. No, quite the opposite. So MCA themselves, they're basically just here to enforce the scheme, but provided you play nice, you play by the rules, give them what they want to know, answer their questions, you basically get a license. So, current state of affairs. At a recent New Zealand Medicinal Cannabis Council event, another license holder said the current legislation is workable for both the industry and for patients. So this isn't specifically just coming from me, that kind of feels that way. However, we are still very immature with our market. The theory goes that we're potentially somewhere maybe 10 years behind America at this sort of stage. Yeah, so in the early days, the industry reps believed they had a strong head start. Early push was for the highest possible focus on safety and quality. The trade-off was that quality sort of started to disappear in terms of to give way more to safety. And not a lot of lessons were learned from the underground, which sucks. Currently, patients are making it very clear that they crave quality and variety. Now, we're going to try and avoid mentioning companies by name. However, it's worth noting that the only product that went from seed all the way through to sale, so the seed, the cultivation, the harvest, dry, cure, extraction, manufacturing, and then to consumers, was cultivated by Puro and was manufactured by Helios. That's their full spectrum CBD subdrops. There's been a 10% drop in the total number of overall license holders in the last 6 months, despite 4 additional new licenses being issued. And there's been approximately a 25% overall churn in 6 months alone, which is pretty shit. Almost all of the license holders are banking on exports. None of them seem to care too much about the domestic market. It's a generalization. There's definitely some that do, but for the most part, they're all eyeing up overseas. Most of them are hemorrhaging cash, some a lot faster than others. That's just the harsh reality of it. So 3 years on, the market is dominated by imported products, and if changes come to legislation, it's likely going to be to the benefit of quality and patient accessibility, potentially with loosening things so that exports can happen a little bit easier too. So how do we actually get to that current state of affairs? Well, the early industry was partially to blame. A lot of them were really cashed up. They had massive bankrolls, some of them from large crowdfunding, things like that. And they kind of shot themselves in the foot. The early industry pushed for... some of them pushed for strict regulations, some of them pushed for lessons learned from the underground. But by and large, yeah, the overall push was for super strict regulations. And some of the companies that even brought in international experts who were vehemently against these super strict regulations, unfortunately, they got ignored. The other part was a fear for doctors, so the theory was doctors wouldn't give anything that's not GMP certified. Doctors don't frankly give a shit. Most of them don't even have the time to upskill around prescribing medicinal cannabis products and things like that. Even within doctors, there's a lot of misinformation. My doctor said to me, yeah, I'd love to find out more about it, but with dozens of new products coming out every single week, it's really hard to kind of keep up with that. The unfortunate reality is there's only maybe a product a month, not dozens a week, but yeah. Surely that's not it? Yeah. No, that's basically it. That's roughly how we got here. So you can go back and read the 2019 regulatory impact statement where they did star charts. And you can see on the right-hand side their GPP, like what Canada has. Yeah, they only got 5 stars. And then you look on the center there, GMP, that's got, 8 or 9 stars. So basically the government looks at that and goes, oh, more stars, more good. And that's... That's basically how we got here. So before we go any further, though, a bit of a note on advertising, because there was nowhere else for me to put it in this entire presentation. You can't do it. You can't advertise your product. You can't make unfounded medical claims, nor can you repeat someone else's claims either. MedSafe will hunt you down. So even if, say, your cousin happens to go, oh, yeah, I take medicinal cannabis because it's great, it helps me with my insomnia, you're not technically allowed to repeat that. That is an unfounded medical claim, and they can come after you for it. So just be careful there. So should you even actually get started? Well, domestically, there's an estimated 300,000 patients. I believe this was taken from the New Zealand Drug Foundation. It's potentially a couple of years old now. Only 6% of them are prescribed users. Estimates put that between 320 and 940 million annually. Domestically alone, there's potentially over $1 billion worth in terms of estimated market size. Internationally, massive growth, relatively 20% year on year. 80% of the legal global markets are medicinal. But should you even start... You get to help patients, and for me that's actually quite important. You get to improve their quality of life and fulfill their needs, and this should always be at the back of your mind with everything that you're doing. It's not just about tinctures though, so you don't have to make oils. Flower, even internationally, still makes up 40 to 50% of the market. So as a cultivator, there's a fair to high chance that you can carry on just cultivating. You don't have to ever make oils. Leave that to some of the bigger people who are more interested in that. Quick SWOT analysis, really rough, really loose, but whatever. Existing companies have forged the legislation to its current usable state. And automation has greatly evolved throughout 2021, 2022, which makes things a lot easier for you to scale. Being small and nimble is going to be a lot safer as well. So those are going to be some of your strengths as you start out being a small cultivator. Weaknesses, though, you've got no license. There's no guarantee that you'll get a license, and you need to spend a shit ton of money in order to actually secure your premises and get it ready to get a license. I'm not going to bother going through the others, but yeah, there's definitely opportunities. Now, keep in mind, you're never going to be able to compete on price. There's no point in even trying to ever compete on price. Wages basically are going to be your biggest expense. They make it impossible. Cost of living alone, say Mexico and Thailand, are 3 to 4 times higher. That stat for New Zealand was pulled, I believe, just before COVID, and it's obviously gone up quite a lot since then. So yeah, you just don't even bother competing on price. A race to the bottom is not going to benefit anybody. It's not going to benefit patients. It's not going to benefit you as a cultivator either. You should compete on quality, compete on new products like strains, terpenes, flavors, compete on something with variety, and something as well that is a bit of a taking a leaf from the adult use rec market, specifically in the States, is that limited time releases give more of a sense of urgency. And we've actually seen this when it comes to things like Sour Apple. Word of mouth gets around pretty damn quickly when something comes out, something that's the new, and people like it when it's good. I've put in there CKFC, so when it comes to KFC, every April, May, for 2 weeks, KFC will bring out the Double Down Burger. It's limited time only. And during that time, those 2 weeks, I'll go there at least 5 to 10 times and get myself a burger, just because I know it's only there for a limited time. So, what are the minimum quality standards? They are basically a shield for patients, designed to look after them and ensure that patients aren't going to be consuming unsafe products. Also known as bacteria sucks. Now, you need to memorize the European Pharmacopoeia 10th edition, specifically section 5.1.4, and more recently 5.1.8. Even if your offtake agreement doesn't require you meet these standards, these should always be your goal, because they're going to put you on the right path to successful grows, good practices, and that kind of thing. So microbial averages, how much bacteria is there in these things? In terms of the section 5.1.4, it stipulates that for inhalation, you're allowed 200 CFU per gram of bacteria. So those are colony-forming units. These are the strictest in the world, and this is why you'll see a lot of the products, especially all of the earlier stuff that first made its way here, that was imported and went through the regulations, was gamma irradiated. An average home indoor grow is going to be somewhere between 20,000 to 200,000 CFU per gram, and outdoor 2 million, 4 million. It'll vary a bit depending on how good the weather was, for example. This year is a prime example of why outdoors can be really bad, given the flooding, the cyclones. We've basically just had 3 months from January, February, and March that's just been absolutely shocking. And so even when you're trying to submit product to be used as a tea, which has a higher permitted microbial count, you probably can't even do that with the outdoor stuff. So outdoors basically just restricted for extractions under this regulations. So given it's allowed a higher microbial count, is tea just another name for moldy weed? Definitely not, but you're going to hear a lot of misinformation, especially from patients who unfortunately just don't understand. This was a very creative way from one of the early license holders to get dried flower imported and into the country. So if you miss out on that 200 CFU per gram, and let's be honest, a lot of the time people are still probably going to, you could still have it sold as a tea under section 5.1.8 of the European Pharmacopoeia. The theory is that if you boil cannabis in water, you'll sterilize it, and that's hilarious, making tea out of cannabis, because it's not traditionally water soluble, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, so sometimes you just got to be a little bit creative with the regulations and think outside of the box, but it does reaffirm that things are workable. So other items for the New Zealand minimum quality standards that you will need to be meeting: no salmonella, no heavy metals, be mindful of your foliar sprays, smoking is out for patients, never going to happen, but vaping's cool, hence inhalation. There's no upper limits for THC, so if you happen to have some really amazing strain, maybe it's 25-30%, awesome, fantastic, that's still able to be sold under NZMQS. Likewise though, if it's only 5%, that's still perfectly acceptable under NZMQS, and patients are definitely craving variety. Testing for manufacturing must be done in GMP or ISO 17025 accredited labs. Certain aspects must be done in a GMP certified facility, such as drying. And LOD loss on drying is prohibitively dry. It sucks. But then again, your offtake, depending on what it's for, may or may not require it. But at all times, NZMQS should be your endgame, so that one day you can sell dried flower to patients here, even if your first offtake that you get doesn't require it. So what do patients actually want? What do they actually need? Potency, number one. They're interested in being more efficient. They're happy to pay a little bit more up front, so that they might only have to inhale half a gram instead of a whole gram, for example. Terpenes. Terpenes are a big one. The bag appeal, the nose and the smell of it, the variety therein, they play a massive part. Customers are starting to kind of get clued up a bit more, and in more internationally sophisticated markets, we see that terpenes actually play more of a role than straight potency. And finally, the quality of the dry and cure. Again, LOD is going to screw you over a little bit there, but whatever. In time, we're going to see a lot more patients wanting that to be focused on. So licenses, what do you actually need? Probably just cultivation, frankly. Now, with a cultivation license, you can harvest, you can dry, and you can cure. You can make clones, but you can't do any kind of extractions, you can't do any milling, you can't do grinding, that sort of stuff. You can only ever sell your flower to another license holder. Contrary to what certain people have been touting online, it doesn't matter if you've got a CBD product, CBD flower, you still can't sell that to patients. Even if they are terminally ill, they still have to go via their GP. Don't even try it, you will lose your license. Manufacturing license currently in use to make oils and things. Eventually, in theory, though, you could do everything from making vape pens, you could make suppositories, you can make other kind of like sachets that people put in their drinks, all of that kind of fun stuff. If you are going to go for manufacturing, you'll also need a license to manufacture medicines in addition to a medicinal cannabis manufacturing license. It's hilarious, but them's the rules. MedSafe makes them, not me. Supply, you'll need that for importing and exporting. What about a nursery? Basically, don't even bother. You're not going to be a seed bank. No one cares. It's a stupid license at this point. And you can't export your genetics under a nursery license at present, though that may change later on. Similarly, the research license was a bit of a mix-up there. Nobody's got a research license, so stick with cultivation. You don't want nursery, you don't want research, because research is for clinical trial research, not for researching the plant itself. So in summary, there's basically three things you may be interested in. Medicinal cannabis, that's the only one that is required to grow dank bud. That's basically it. GACP, good agricultural collection processes. Just proves that you can look after your staff, that you've got toilets. It's expensive as shit. If you're going to go through the only company at the moment in New Zealand that does it, it's going to cost you somewhere in the vicinity of 40-50 grand. It's completely optional, and it's quite likely not actually going to change the price that you can sell to your offtake buyer for. GMP, good manufacturing processes, though this is for manufacturing. You don't want to be cultivating under GMP practices because it is very prohibitive. It makes your life a nightmare. Eventually, if you want to start making products, though, you'll need GMP when you get your manufacturer license. So all that you really need, though, cultivation for medicinal cannabis. So who can actually get a license? A license to cultivate? Yeah, you can go and get one. You'll be named the responsible person, and that basically means that if shit goes missing, then as the responsible person, you are responsible. If you've got priors, that's cool. No worries. Even if you will need to get specific ministerial approval. There is one person who has a prior cannabis-related drug offense who is a named responsible person, but that's totally fine, basically. Don't let that put you off. And your staff. If you want to employ people, specifically cultivators, because the best cultivators come from the underground, and there's the possibility that they'll have priors, that's fine. You will need to do a police check as part of the employment process, but so long as you know about their priors, that's actually okay. So how does the application process go? Number one, they'll do a pre-screening. They'll put down details on there, and they will make sure that, like, your company details that you've put in their match. They're going to make sure that you've included all of the paperwork. They're not going to go through it all, but they're basically just going to make sure that you have included, like, a security plan, for example. Second part, they're going to do a license review. This is like a tabletop valuation, if you will. They're going to make sure that all of your operating procedures stack up. They're going to make sure that your security procedures are, at least in theory, going to be sufficient to keep the cannabis safe from getting back to the underground or any kind of diversion. They will come back to you at the end of this. They'll ask RFIs, requests for information. If you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, they ask things in a real roundabout way. That's okay. You're going to get these RFIs. Don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. They basically just want to clarify a few bits and pieces, and provided you actually give them the information that that they want, that's fine. Your license will proceed. After your tabletop evaluation, you'll go on-site. They'll do an on-site audit. Now, every single facility, every single place that cannabis will be cultivated, every single place it will be stored, every single place it will be dried, all of that kind of stuff, it must be audited and reviewed physically in person by the Medicinal Cannabis Agency. If they haven't been out to do an audit on your particular site, it's not legal, it's not licensed. It doesn't matter if... unfortunately, we've seen a number of unscrupulous and unsavory individuals trying to take advantage of other people and just saying, hey, yeah, I'll get you licensed. No, unless the Medicinal Cannabis Agency have been out to audit it in person, you're not licensed. So a full license, so all of this whole entire process, it's $8,400. It's not actually that much. It's pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things. Of that, to renew your cultivation license is going to be somewhere around about $3,400 a year. That's cheap as chips in the grand scheme of things. The main cost is going to be security and securing your facility. So what can you do with a cultivation license? Anything you really care about as a traditional legacy cultivator, you're going to be able to do it. So you can buy seeds, you can declare seeds from an illicit source, you can grow cannabis, you can take clones, you can veg flower, you can breed them, you can harvest, dry, and cure them, which is traditionally what a cultivator would do. So then the resulting flower is all sold to another license holder. Now, if you're clever, again, this is something that I mentioned earlier about being clever with the regulations, you'll have clones and seeds lined up and ready to go for when you get a license. Obviously, they could never be on site, and they are 100% illegal until you are licensed. However, if you've completed Form D, the Illicit Plants and Seed Declaration Form, and MCA have accepted it, it'll get added to your license, and then as soon as your license is finally rubber stamped, you've got seeds and clones ready to rock and roll. Now you can even declare fully mature and flowering plants. We were looking at ways that we could even have underground cultivators basically bring in a fully mature plant and then eventually sell that to pharmacies and things like that. The theory is there. It still needs a little bit more work to be fleshed out, but yeah, basically in theory that could happen too. Again, the plants are 100% illegal and illicit until they have been brought into a licensed facility. So keep that in mind. It's not like a blanket opportunity for the law to be flaunted, if you will. But yeah, it doesn't stipulate that they must be clones. It just stipulates plants, which is kind of cool. Are you looking to do more than 20 clones? Technically at the moment the legislation though does not have any provision for any sort of other off-site nursery. So for example, I cannot operate as a nursery for another license holder unless I'm only doing 20 plants per trip. So if they came to me and said, hey, we want 500 clones every 4 to 6 weeks, we want 1,000 clones every quarter, yeah, technically you can't do that under the current legislation because you're only supposed to be doing 20 plants at a time. Although you can freely trade them back and forth, there's no stipulation that there must be any exchange of money. You could give them away to other license holders. And similarly, the government doesn't actually take any kind of a cut for clones sold between license holders. So what are your obligations if you get a license? So security is number one. Number two, you've got to track your product from seed to sale. Be they clones, be they vegging, flowering, or even even harvested bud. Your destruction procedure, you're going to have to get rid of everything. So at the end of a season, your stems, your stalks, your sticks, your root ball, your soil, your cocoa core, rockwool, clay balls, and neck cups must be securely destroyed. Originally, we were under the impression that it had to go through a witnessed, secure, biohazardous medicinal waste disposal process. That's not entirely true, provided you're either incinerating it or shredding it 50-50 with cocoa core or kitty litter, and you make it unrecognizable, irrecoverable, and irretrievable, then you can basically just put it out with your normal rubbish after that. But you must shred it or incinerate it. What a couple of clever companies are doing is they will basically, if they've grown in cocoa, they will then, after they've harvested, they will lift up the plant by the stump of the trunk, pull off as much of the cocoa core and things as they possibly can from the root ball. They'll put the root ball and things through a shredder, and then just mix it back in with the cocoa core that they did previously, that they previously pulled off, and then just pop it out with the rubbish, and that's cool. Safe transport. What happens if the van breaks down after it has been, like if somebody has shown up as part of the offtake? What happens if the van breaks down while it's taking it away? You've got to have that kind of thing as well. And accountability. So if the Medicinal Cannabis Agency give you a phone call and go, hey, we want to know 2 weeks ago for a whole week, we want the entire footage from cameras 1, 7, and 12. You're also going to need to do stock takes every January, and your SOPs need to cover that. And finally, you'll also have to do provide them a little bit of information for the International Narcotics Bureau, but that's basically just what was your flowering area. So I've mentioned an offtake a couple of times. What is an offtake? Well, basically, it's where you've pre-sold all of your materials that you're going to harvest. Now, this is really important for 2 reasons. Number one, you don't have to find a buyer, which is fantastic. You can just get on with cultivating. And number two, MCA are going to be less concerned with diversion taking place. So it's kind of like an extra bit of security for them that you're not going to be cultivating, get to the end of it and go, no, I've got myself, 20, 30, 40 pounds worth. What do I do with it all? You've got an offtake agreement somewhere that it can be sold, so in theory it should all go there. So in order for you to actually get your license, you got to have an offtake agreement. Will a letter of intent suffice? Yep, it will, and you'll basically be given 28 days to seal the deal effectively. Otherwise, they'll revoke your license. The really shit part is that most licensed entities won't give you an offtake agreement until you're licensed, but you can't get licensed without an offtake. So yeah, letter of intent. If you can get a letter of intent, that's a pretty good starting position. But again, that can also be a bit of a struggle. So how do you actually even get started? Well, the first thing that you're going to need, like we mentioned, you're going to need your offtake. Then you're not going to need property. You can't do anything without a property. Your landlord will have to write a letter to the Medicinal Cannabis Agency stating that they know what you're doing there. So you can't just hide it from your landlord and just, hide potentially 40, 50 square meters, whatever, worth of flowering canopy space and just, not tell your commercial real estate agent, whatever. They've got to know. You'll need to design your floor plan, get things secured, set up your cameras, put bars on your windows, board them up, whatever. Now, your lights and your watering utilities and things like that, those aren't actually required. They require that carbon filters and things be in place. But anything that you're using, like your reservoirs, your nutrients, that doesn't actually have to be there until you have your license. Number 5, you're going to need to write your SOPs to ensure it matches your workflow. And you'll potentially have some SOPs right from the get-go, and you'll basically just need to amend them. For example, there's no point in mentioning a roller door for a loading bay if you don't have one. You'll submit it to the Medicinal Cannabis Agency. Then part number 1 is your first fee, which we kind of mentioned a bit before. Part number 2, they'll do their disc review. That's the second fee. And then lately, they've also been including the third fee for the physical on-site audit at the same time. Once they're happy with all of your RFI responses, they'll book a time. It has to be a month into the future, so kind of keep that in mind. It will be a month into the future. So, for example, if they give you the AOK as of the, let's say, the 1st of March, and they basically say, yep, we're happy with your tabletop valuation, they'll come out and they'll do an audit, but the soonest that they will do that would be the 1st of March. The 1st of April, a whole month after. Once they're happy with your on-site audit, it's going to take a further 2 weeks, and then you will get your medicinal cannabis license. Then and only then are you permitted to bring plants into your facility. Now, your SOPs are going to evolve, so just expect that. Be flexible with them. The main thing that the MCA are looking to do is diversion prevention. They just want to stop cannabis from getting out into the public. Again, I get that's hilarious, given you're probably getting your genetics from the underground. Whatever. I don't make the rules. That's just what that's their primary focus, diversion prevention. So a couple of key factors for a successful grow. Knowledge is definitely power. If you can know your CO2, your temperature, your humidity, air quality, with like your particulate matter, estimated volatile organic compounds, your pH, your EC, and all that sort of thing. The more that you can know, the better. You're going to want to keep it super clean. Again, this is where shooting for the 200 CFUs per gram is going to put you on the right path, because it will give you good procedures. But it's not just about the surfaces. Air is also of a lot of importance, because that's how sort of bacteria can move around too. And it's better to be proactive. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Can you afford to bring TMV or hop-latent viroid in? And even if you did, how would you know that you've got it? So it's really easy to grow weed. It's literally, it's in the name. It's even easier to grow bad weed. But growing high quality cannabis consistently, that's the real challenge. So we'll talk a little bit about quality. The focus should be on quality. If you're focusing on quality, you're going to reach your 200 CFUs eventually, if that's your goal. It's quality. This is what a difference 3 days can make when you ignore symptoms. So last year at my prior facility, I took 3 days off to go to a funeral. The first photo was on the Friday. The last photo was on the Monday. I went in on the Sunday and took the middle photo there, and that's what a difference. And technically that's 4 days or 3 nights, but you get the picture. Would things have been different had I been there? Quite possibly not. Me and my then business partner had agreed that there were certain things that we didn't actually need to be writing down, and we should have been. We should have been keeping a closer eye on things. We should have seen that the first signs of it and been able to adjust rapidly, but we didn't. Carrying on with a few overarching concepts again: cleanliness, everything. Clean your genetics before they come into the facility even. Learn from the legacy market. School of Hard Knocks has taught them a lot of good lessons, a lot of valuable lessons. Learn from that. Plan for success though. Again, when setting up the first facility, my then business partner wasn't too interested in setting up even our lights, for example, and we kept our fire extinguishers in the boxes just in case we needed to take them back to Bunnings. Now, despite us having about a month worth after they had approved our tabletop valuation and things, the planning at that stage was still for failure, not for success. And so where we could have been doing things like hanging lights over that course of a month, we were basically just waiting for the Medicinal Cannabis Agency to come out on site. We didn't do much instead, because it was the safe play, if you will, to plan for failure, not for success. And so we were on the back foot for quite some time. Plan for success, because if you plan for it, yeah. Moving along. Start small and scale up. It's easy to add a second room or get a second facility, but you can't ask your landlord not to bill you for a room or two that you're not using. Be nimble. You're not making paracetamol. You're not going to be doing this same exact thing for a decade. Your genetics will change. Expect for it to change. And pay attention. Similar to what we mentioned on the previous slide there, plants need daily love. And if you want to go take a holiday, or if you happen to fall sick, how's that gonna work? I just want to bring it back though again, focus on the patient, because if you're focusing on the patient, the quality will follow as well. The patient is the only reason that you do what you do. So preparing for a facility, how quickly can you get there if something happens to go bump in the night? Like if you're in Auckland, you don't want a facility all the way down in Tauranga. That's a bad idea. Do you need this much space? The first facility that I was looking at, I was planning for somewhere in the vicinity of 700 square meters worth of canopy space. Eventually settled for significantly less, like 10% of that, less than 10%. And I'm grateful because I had grossly underestimated the amount of dehumidification and other things that it was going to require. Can you get by with less? Can you start smaller and scale up? Have you allowed walkways, sufficient access to aisles? Do you have the funds for a couple of seasons as well? It's great that a lot of people will go, yeah, it's going to cost me this much to kit out a facility, but then what about actual paying your staff to do the cultivation of things? If you're Ethan Hunt, can you Mission Impossible your way through? Is it going to require more than a ram raid and some bolt cutters, like in terms of getting into your facility? And are there 2 barriers to it at all times? And that even goes for when it's being transported as part of your offtake agreement. Lastly, when you're making your preparations, how easily do you have access to water and to dispose of water and or plants? Any preparation you can do up front is going to make your life 10 times easier as you fit out your facility. So we're going to rapidly kind of shoot through a bunch of slides just like this now. I'm not going to go through every single point. You can pause the video. You can go back and read the actual slides later on. But this is just to kind of get you thinking about a few bits and pieces and hopefully point you on the right path as you look to design your facility and things like that. So your fence, it doesn't have to be electric, but it's got to be 1.8 meters tall. If you're doing multiple fences, they have to stand on their own merits, so you can't have 2 fences like 300 mil apart from each other. Can you prevent key cloning? Do you have a drug safe for you to store your harvested cannabis in? Look up Challenger drug safes. If a dude shows up to swap out CO2 bottles, how are you going to make sure that you can get the old bottles that are empty out to them while making sure that they can't come inside? And if there's a fire, how quickly can your staff get out? What's your recall process as well? If you happen to send off cannabis to your offtake buyer and they get it and they go, oh, it's a bit moldy. We found mold on a couple of them. We want to send it all back to you. What's your recall process? Access control. In the event of an attempted intrusion or theft, how do you detect that in real time? And how do your responsible personnel get notified? If one of your staff happens to leave, how do you remove access to them to ensure that they can't come into the facility? And can you give temporary or limited access to guests and contractors, or do you have to basically escort them? Like if one of your guests has to go to the bathroom and you're in your flowering room, do you basically have to walk out with them? You don't need to be Fort Knox, so keep that in mind, but you've got to have taken reasonable steps to prevent the diversion. In terms of construction, if you need to get a builder in, like mid-flower, for example, to one of your flower rooms, what sort of issues is that going to cause, and will your operating procedures actually allow you to do that? Can you design your rooms and your entire floor plan with this in mind? So if you've got to replace carbon filters, fans, even like a pump, a dehumidifier, your air conditioning, like what happens? And think about sealing around the doors and things as well to ensure that your rooms stay appropriately pressurized. Raven seal's worth looking into. Anywhere that does have a crack, like in a wall, door, for example, is somewhere that air can escape or get in, and that will impact smell, be it going outside your facility, or it's going to impact microbial growth. Cabling. What's the total power consumption of all of your lights, your fans, your dehumidifiers, and your air conditioning if it's all going all at once? Say, for example, there's been a power cut and everything starts back up straight away afterwards and they all turn on at full bore. Are you going to blow a fuse or two? I get it, like AC doesn't run at maximum power all the time, but it's worth keeping that in mind. Same for your dehumidifiers. And even figuring out how many amps of 3-phase you will require. A lot of people sort of find that as soon as they start to get to the 50 square meters, if not less, of flowering space, then they're basically pushing the limits of 3-phase 60 amp. And again, so what happens to your plants, as well as your security systems, your cameras, if there's no power or internet? You are going to have a big power bill, unless you're doing it in greenhouses and things, which we're not specifically covering here. We're looking more traditionally at indoors. You're going to have a big power bill. So find a power company and get a good deal with them. You may also want to look at a power company that's going to do 100% renewably sourced energy as well, so you can sleep better at night, knowing that you are doing your part there too. Health and safety. Has your facility been designed so that if there's a spill, like for example of nutrients, it's not going to be problematic? Or are you basically just going to have to like wet vac everything out of there? Or can you mop it and get it out, for example? If a sensor fails, especially of a CO2 sensor, how are you going to know about that? Or in the event of a CO2 leak, let's say that your regulator freezes on and you start pumping a whole lot of CO2 into your grow space. How are your staff gonna know about that, and how are you gonna get them out safely and stop new people from going in there? If you put some processes in place early on and you have a really thoughtfully designed facility, it is definitely going to make a huge difference for the safety of your employees. Audits are worth keeping in mind too, because you're going to have to audit both your staff, your policies, and your procedures on an ongoing basis. How are you going to make sure that your policies and your procedures are actually consistent with what your staff are doing? Do you need to change what your staff are doing and do spot checks and adherence checks, or do you need to update your procedures and then let the Medicinal Cannabis Agency know? Or what do you do if they're not being followed? It's better to record more information than not enough. It definitely is. But there's certainly a fine line. You don't want to get bogged down in paperwork and forget that you're actually there to grow plants. Harvesting. Harvesting is a fun one. How are you going to keep a representative sample of 5+ plants separate? How are you going to get your wet weight for them all, your dry weight? It's because that's probably going to differ. How are you going to harvest 50 plants in a single day, or 500 plants in a single day? And how are you going to trim them, all of them? I like the question at the bottom here. This is really quite really relevant, I think. You might not be able to afford an expensive setup, especially for drying and curing, but can you actually afford to wipe an entire season because you underfunded and underinvested your drying and curing setup? If you get mold, that's it. You're screwed. No one wants moldy weed. Cleaning. How often are you going to change your carbon filters? Because carbon filters won't tell you when they're no longer as efficient as they once were. How are you going to scrub the air before it comes into your facility and as it goes out? Or the air that's already in your flowering rooms? What products are you cleaning certain things with? Are you cleaning the walls with something different from your pots, for example? And how are you going to actually deal with the likes of fleas, flies, roaches, and rodents? Have you got that as part of your IPM procedures? So broad thoughts as we start to wrap up here. When writing your SOPs, you want to be specific enough, just specific enough that your staff can't fuck things up, but you want to be vague enough that you can change it if you need. I know of another license holder who can't change their nutrient line because it's written into their operating procedures. So instead, when writing our procedures, we simply wrote that the manufacturer's guidelines on feeding and nutrient mixing needed to be adhered to, and that those guidelines would be stuck on the wall somewhere. Really easy, because then you can change your nutrient line as freely as you want. It doesn't matter if you go from a 2-part to a 3-part to a 5-part or back again. If one of your key staff passed away, or let's say they're overseas and they get held up, there's a lockdown, is there someone else who could do their job for them? And are your SOPs written in such a way that somebody could basically just pick them up and carry on? What contingencies do you have for every stage of cultivation? So if someone's tired and they leave a tap on, can you tell? Are you going to get a notification? I heard of a facility where somebody was tired or potentially high, I don't know, and they left a tap running, and they went to go home at the end of the day, and they saw the mess that it had made, and rather than fess up and own up to it, the staff member basically took a hammer to the tap and it started pissing water everywhere, and they just left it. They went home and hoped they hoped that people would think it was some other kind of an accident or whatever. But had that facility had flood detection and things, they would have been able to send somebody else really, really quickly and identify the problem and just literally just switch off the water. And then also think about, why should someone else buy your product instead of somebody else's? Like, in the grand scheme of things, if you are providing it to patients, I mean, this is a pseudo-rec kind of insight here. But why would they want your product? What is your product, like, what's your point of difference for your product? Why would they want to buy that instead of, buying a product that's already available from their GP? Why should they try your new stuff? You are going to learn a lot as you go, though, and as you grow. So be prepared to adapt, and adapt quickly. So some general advice as we wrap it up: don't leave water exposed to light. It's a bad idea. Things will fail over time. Have contingencies and alerts. You might be a pretty switched on person, but build your facility like you expect somebody to trip over everything or spill water and nutrients, even if you wouldn't. It happens. You also don't want 10 plus apps. I know of a facility that has 9 apps that they use to tie everything together. I know of another facility that has 11 apps and they control it all from that. Like, that's not going to be very practical in the long run. You want one app, you want to integrate everything, have automation. The human element is going to be your weakest link, and it's also going to be your most expensive. So anything you can do to automate things is going to be beneficial. Again, put contingencies and alerts in place. Don't skimp on dehumidification or drying. Overspec it. If you happen to lose a dehumidifier right as you're doing your drying, you don't want to get mold because you are one dehumidifier down. It's bad. It's really, really bad. Overspec it. Everybody is going to tell you they can do better, and some of them are right. A lot of people are just keyboard warriors, though. But find the people who know their shit, who know what they're doing, and who have experience, and learn from them, or potentially hire them. Ignore the rest, though, because they're never going to be in your shoes, and that's okay. There's a lot of people out there who are, unfortunately, just have sour grapes. You could help them into the industry, as we hope to, but you're not obligated to. So learn to tune out the noise there. But most of all, and most importantly, remember that you are doing this legally. You're doing this for patients. You are in a position of privilege. But enjoy it, and enjoy every single day, because this is so fucking awesome what you get to do. So again, in summary, we don't have rec. We don't have adult use rec, but we probably don't need it. And even if it does come along, it's either A, not going to impact you, or B, you're going to have an early mover advantage, and that's cool too. Final closing points. Cleanliness is a priority. Start with good genetics. Put yourself in MCA's shoes. Walk before you run. Be smart. There's plenty of wiggle room in the legislation, and MCA are your friend. Plan some more, and be critical of yourself before committing. Find flaws. Play devil's advocate. It will pay dividends. Massive, massive dividends in the long run. Remember that this is absolutely doable, and I want to encourage you that this is doable. There is a shit ton of paperwork, granted, but it's possible, and you can pursue this, so be encouraged. Finally, be humble. Everybody knows everybody in this country, and there is no room for egos. We have 2 degrees of separation. There is always going to be a better cultivator out there, far better than us, for example. And I make no bones about that I am not the greatest cultivator. There are far better people out there than I am. There always will be. But you don't want to be pissing off other license holders by having a massive ego and letting that get in the way of business relationships. Be humble. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this informative. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you do have any questions, you can find me on Instagram at chill.division.nz. You can send me an email if you'd like, or you can reach out in the comment section below down on YouTube. Thank you again so much for tuning in. Again, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this. Look forward to seeing you in a future video. Cheers.